My name is Laura Franke. I'm on the MVF Board of Directors, and I'm going to be moderating our discussion tonight. I'm going to give each of the candidates a minute to introduce themselves, and then we'll start taking questions. Mr. Glenn Gargan became unexpectedly ill, and so he's not going to be able to make it tonight. So we'll just have our two candidates here for the evening. Pam, would you like to start?
Sure.
Okay.
My name is Pamela Bort. I am running for my 4th term on the Board of Directors. I'm inclined to think that 4 terms is too much, but on the other hand, I also believe in an institutional continuity, and I guess I have that now. I'm particularly interested in seeing the development of the golf course and seeing plans for the development of the professional center and the village center. But even more so, I'm interested in the issue of parking in the village and traffic. I'm president of the South Village Homes Corporation, and the one item we hear about at every single meeting is parking. And I believe it's an issue that a number of communities in the village need to address, and I'll be interested in seeing what the board can do with regards to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Jerome?
Sure. Good evening. My name is Jerome Leonard, and I'm running for my very first term for the Montgomery Village Board of Directors. My wife, my family, and I have lived in the village for 15 years. It's been a time of great flourishing for us. We've enjoyed being residents here, being actively involved. A little bit about my background. I was a former president of the Montgomery Village Rotary Club and the foundation for the Rotary Club. We both have served. My wife is sitting right there, and I'd like to thank her for her support. We've been involved throughout the community in terms of active roles in our children's education, PTA, in the churches, and in our neighborhood, Williams Range. Professionally, my background is in technology. And besides the constant prodding from David and Pete to get more involved and join this leadership organization for our community, I, like many of you, want to see our village thrive, with the village center being modernized, the medical center being revitalized, and of course the Bloom residential project. We have to do that thoughtfully in terms of our transportation, and engaging more of our residents to have a voice in the process. So I look forward to working with everyone here and in the community.
Thank you very much, Jerome. Okay, so we're going to open it up to questions. We didn't receive any written or email questions, so we're only going to have the questions from the audience tonight. We're asking, if you would like to ask a question, that you go up to the microphone here and state your question, and then sit back down. We're going to give each resident a minute to ask their question, and then each candidate a minute to answer, and we'll switch between who answers first. Okay, would anyone like to step up and speak first? Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Pam Mondell, and I'm a resident of 41 years in Montgomery Village. And I wanted to know what your opinion was about new information, as far as I was concerned, about HOC having the contract for cider mill, and if you know what the percentage of HOC renters were in place there before they owned it. Was it 90%? I mean, I just don't have any information on it at all, and I was surprised by it, but that was my main question. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Pam, would you like to answer first?
I don't know what the percentage of current HOC rentals are in cider mill. My understanding is that once the purchase is completed, it will be 100% HOC clearly, and that the residents will have to subscribe to the requirements of the HOC process. We have nothing to do with who buys cider mill. There's nothing we can do. I am hopeful that HOC, once it owns the property, will exercise greater control than I've seen in HOC-owned properties, say in South Village. I don't know if that will be the case, but I certainly hope so.
Thank you, Pam. Jerome, would you like to answer?
Great question, Pam. This topic came up at the last board meeting, and I believe it was Pete who led some of the discussion about the ongoing effort for HOC to work with the cider mill apartment complex and the pending sale. What I recall hearing is that there is a very strong interest to have a mixed portfolio of market rate apartments available, as well as reduced rate. I don't know exactly how that's structured or if they're going to follow through with that with the new ownership, but certainly it's a large community, it's a large property, and as residents in the area, we should have the desire to get as much information and be as engaged as possible. You're welcome.
Thank you, Jerome. Pam, okay.
I'm Keith Solomon. I'd like to follow up on two of Pam's earlier comments about parking in the village. I'd like to ask both of the candidates as to what kind of leadership position they will take, may take, possibly could take in terms of encouraging Montgomery Village Foundation to take a more leadership role in helping us address and potentially solve the increasingly parking problems that we're experiencing throughout the village.
Thank you, Keith. Jerome, would you like to answer this one first?
Well, thank you for the question, Keith. I can imagine that some of the parking problems that you're talking about are commercial vehicles that are parked near residences and perhaps in more of the public access ways? Or are you talking about problems within communities?
I'm predominantly talking about those streets owned by homeowners associations that are being increasingly congested.
I see. I think that is a worthy topic for the board to evaluate and to consider and gather information on how significant the problem is and where specifically we're seeing an increase in unlawful parking or nuisance type of situations. And once we monitor that, once we have a good understanding of why that's happening, who's doing it, go directly to those people who are responsible, and if it's a violation of the laws, then we need to enforce parking laws. But I think cooperatively working together, it's a solvable problem.
Thank you, Jerome. Pam?
I think the problem is most evident in the high-density communities. South Village is a high-density community. One of our problems we find is that whereas when Kettler built South Village, they set aside, well, according to Mark Furley, 2.1 parking spaces per unit. Now you have grown children who move back home with their parents, and there are maybe 4 or 5 cars to a unit. That takes up all the available parking in South Village, and then there is runoff. I understand in terms of a leadership role, I think the board is going to work on that. The Karen Kajanian Community Management is convening a meeting of presidents of the managed communities to discuss this issue and see if we can come to any kind of understanding and possible solutions for this problem.
Thank you, Pam.
If
I may, I have a couple. I'm Sarah Harris. I've been here in the village for over 40 years and have had leadership positions in my immediate community as well as the board.
Sarah, would you mind just asking one question at a time? and
Okay.
then-
So my question is, to what extent are either of you or both of you familiar with the AARP quality, community, reliability evaluation study that evaluates communities across the U.S. and gives numerical evaluation on housing and environment and several of community-related topics?
Are you just asking if they're familiar with it?
Yes.
Is that your question?
To what extent are you either familiar?
Okay, thank you.
Well, I have seen it. I have not read it or studied it in depth over the last several years.
Relative to Montgomery Village?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Lennon?
I am not familiar with it.
Okay. I would suggest that you take a look at it and the evaluation sectors, and then think and lead with those in mind. And also look at those in comparison, say, to Columbia and others across the U.S., Columbia, Reston. And of course, there are wide variabilities for those.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Somebody else like to ask a question?
Sorry, my husband's parking a car, and he has a question too.
Okay.
MVF has long had a policy of coexistence with wildlife. This involves strategies to mitigate possible conflicts, including walks, especially in summer, when the infant geese wrapping trees against beaver damage and fencing for deer protection. Our architectural control has special rules to allow residents to protect their property. For years, I have asked this question every year at the forum, and every candidate has agreed with the policy. I'm asking you tonight, do you agree with coexistence with wildlife in Montgomery Village? And just to add, that's the reason we came here, was because of nature.
Thank you, Jane. Jerome?
I do agree with the policy. I am a supporter of wildlife, and so I think that is extremely important. It's just been my observation at an arm's length that the population of deer and ducks seem to be increasing. So I'm not sure to what extent Montgomery Village works with other jurisdictions and other entities to monitor that and to make sure that we strike that balance between the residents and the wildlife.
Well, we have a goose count every year here, and it has remained stable since 2001. I'll just add that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Jane.
Yes, I do support the policy, Jane. And, well, I'd like to take it a little further, but that's just me.
You'd like to take it a little further?
Yeah,
Okay.
there are some things that I think we could probably do better.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Rich,
Every month, I go to the Up County Citizens Advisory Board, and all they talk about up there is roads, M83 mostly, and usually if they have somebody from the county there, it's always Department of Transportation. So my suggestion, or my question is, do you think it would be worthwhile for us to have a series of lectures here and invite each department of the county to give a presentation, like DEP, DOT, Parks Department, Planning Board, so we get to understand what's available in our county government. And that's my question.
Okay, thank you, Rich.
Thank you.
Pam?
I think it would be useful for both members of the county government and for residents of the village to have the opportunity to speak with and listen to each other. So yes, I would be in favor of that. I'm not sure how it will be structured, but I think that would be a good idea.
Thank you, Pam. Jerome?
Yes, and Rich, I am in agreement. I think it's a great idea to foster more education, more dialogue between the various entities responsible for transportation. We know that each and every month that we live in this county, we're facing transportation issues. So the more that we can engage, the more that we can learn, the more that we can have our voices heard, so that all of those are factored into what ultimately gets built, what roads get widened, and how it's going to impact us in our quality of life.
Thank you, Jerome. Okay.
Again, I'm Keith Silliman. Two of you tonight are here as candidates, with a third declared candidate, so we have 3 candidates for 3 board positions in the upcoming election. This is not very conducive to increasing participation by our residents in terms of voting process, so I'm interested in your thoughts about how do we collectively go about encouraging folks to participate in the process, and do you have any insight as to what's preventing people from taking a more active role in their community?
Thank you.
I think people have an innate desire to come out to events like this, but they're busy. Life gets in the way. We, as a board, have to go where people are. So they're on Facebook, they're on Instagram, the millennial generation. That's where we can reach them. It's very challenging through the old media of the village news or something that comes in paper mail. This generation gets their information from their phones. And so that's where we have to reach them, and we have to use influencers, people like my wife, to spread the message so that they will be enticed to come out, get involved, learn, and take action. So that's what I propose, and that's what I'd like to do.
Okay, thank you, Jerome. Pam?
I think Jerome should be on the communications committee. I agree with Jerome. I am, however, one of those people who I think Facebook is an invasion of my privacy, and I'm not inclined to use it. One of the things I've found in going out and trying to talk to people who complain or have a suggestion about how things could be run better in the village, or in South Village for that matter, is I say, well, just stand for election. And the answer I get back most of the time is, but I have a real job. Well, I have a real job too. But I think it's important for people with real jobs to be involved, as well as the people who have retired and now have a lot more time to devote to their community. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pam.
It's okay. I was wondering if you feel that the members of the Board of Directors should attend the village-sponsored events, and how importantly do you think that is to the residents of the village to see the leadership there, or at least 3 people from the board of directors there. I feel it's very important because it shows that we consider this a very important thing and that we're here to support the people. It doesn't have to be all 9, but et cetera. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think it's
my
good.
I think it's important, but I think it's important, period, not a but. Sometimes it's difficult. For example, I've served for 9 years, and I have not made it once to the Christmas tree lighting ceremony. I would like to, but I drive downtown to work, and I drive home, and I just don't make it. There are other things that I have missed. There are other things I've been to. Then, of course, so, I think it's very important. Maybe we need to make more of an effort to determine beforehand which members of the board are available to go to an event. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Jerome?
I think it's extremely important for board members to be visible in the community. That impact of meeting people, people will see your activities, but until they meet you and shake your hand and look at you in your eye and say, hey, wait a minute, I recognize you and you're on the board, what made you decide to serve? I think that sends a volume of message and encouragement to the community.
Perhaps you could wear chains.
Okay, thank you.
Smiling is good. Smiling always works.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. I don't know if we have any more questions.
Well, we all know that we're losing businesses around here. Trader Joe's is leaving in March to go down to, I'm trying to remember, they're moving down in Shady Grove Road area. Sports Authority, we lost, but I understand there was a new grocery store moving in there. Capital One Bank essentially moved out of our area. And what does the board think that we could do to stop this or turn it around, or what's your concern on this?
Okay, thank you,
All
Rich.
right. A great question, and one of my passions is to stimulate business, new businesses that we haven't had in the village. They are always motivated by a profit probability. So they want to know that customers will come, that there's going to be a safe environment, that crime is going to be held in check. But I think that it's a multi-part effort. It's the board, it's the residents, it's other entities, churches who have congregations, all engaging with businesses to attract them here. I think it's possible. It's, retail is facing a hard time all over. Malls are closing. But I think that there's also an opportunity for us to stimulate new growth and have new businesses in the village.
Thank you, Jerome. Pam?
I don't know the answer to that question. I know that Dave is involved in the community and working with businesses. But there are so many competing factors. So many people are doing things online now rather than, I go out to Pet Value and various other places to buy pet food. But everyone else I know who has pets order it from Chewy.com and it's delivered to their door. It's like Jerome says, it's a very difficult environment. And I don't have an answer for it.
Thank you, Pam. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. All right.
Well, we all know that our real estate prices have gone down in recent years, and I guess there's a lot of factors for that. One of my observations is, how can we get more people to move into the village and not go to Clarksburg? I don't understand why people pay more money for a place in Clarksburg than have to drive all the way down to other places. It doesn't make sense. We've got so much more advantages here, green space and everything else. How do we turn this around, or how do we tell the people in Clarksburg, we got it here?
Okay, thank you, Rich.
Well, the sad truth is, I think people like to buy new property. I think the younger you are, you want to buy a new house that no one else has lived in, and you know what you're getting, and you know the history. I mean, it was just built. That's a problem. On the other hand, you're quite right, Rich, we have a lot of advantages here that the residents of Clarksburg do not have. And it's up to the board, it's up to the community to advertise those advantages. And when the new homes are built on the golf course, whether you support the development of the golf course or not, hopefully we can sell those homes as being new and get an influx of new blood.
Okay, thank you, Pam. Jerome?
Excellent. Real estate is one of the key issues. There was an article written in the Washington Business Journal, I believe it was last year, and it looked at this region, it looked at Montgomery County, it looked at home prices, the relative appreciation. Montgomery Village outranked other communities like Clarksburg and even Bethesda and some parts of Potomac as retaining the real estate value even though other places had experienced price drops. So we have a well-kept secret, and to your point, if you look at 270 and where it starts to narrow, it's right here. So we have a tremendous advantage in terms of the proximity, where we are, and of course, the new development that's going to happen here is going to stimulate some attraction for our home values to increase.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Anyone else? Go ahead.
I've noticed, and it's been pointed out, a lot of things are online now. To me, it's the latest fad. We haven't seen all the downside. In fact, the election committee of the state has to have a hard copy of ballots now because of the possibilities of fraudulence, and we're seeing things like one of the credit reporting agencies was hacked, and I think it's important for the village to make clear that people that aren't computer savvy are also welcome to comment on things, and that there is a way of getting a hard copy or something, that they're not left out for whatever reason, that they don't happen to have a computer, they can't be forced to buy a computer, as far as I know. What do you think about making this clear that everybody is welcome, especially assessment-paying people should have the same rights as anyone else, regardless of their savviness in the digital age?
Okay, thank you. Drew?
I work in cybersecurity every day, and it is critical that we do enforce this kind of availability to those, whether it's digital or through paper ballots, transparency, so that everyone's vote is counted and that we can report what the outcomes of that vote was. At the same time, we have an obligation to educate people, how to protect their information and how to receive the same kind of information and trust from entities that have their information.
Thank you, Jerome. Pam?
I would agree with you, Jane. I think that people who don't use computers or should not be in a position where they are unable to get information regarding what's going on in the village. But I think the village does a pretty good job of reaching out to those people. There is the village news, and I would oppose any effort made to put the village news only online. You can go in, you can mail in your assessment payments, you can bring them into the office. You don't need to pay them online. I think the village does a pretty good job at keeping people informed.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for going to the podium to ask your questions. It makes it a lot easier for us to film it and get a transcript.
I wondered what your initiatives, what would be your priority? You, Pam, said a couple of things that you would like to see the Board of Directors dive into a little bit more. We haven't heard from you, Jerome, what you'd like to do, but what would be an initiative that you personally could come, not once a month to a board meeting, but maybe something you feel or you could talk about, or you feel, they always say if you feel passionately about something, you're going to do a better job because you feel so much about it. And I'd like to see some passion, some thoughts, some ideas. Not that there haven't been. Lord only knows we've been here a very long time, and it's been run very well, and I don't have a problem with that. But I always am looking for something like the Great Pumpkin Rice. What's new? What do you feel like we could bring in? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Pam, it's your turn.
Thank you. Well, as I said, I'm very interested in the parking issue right now. And I don't know what the answer is. And so I am going to be spending a lot of time working on that with members of the board, with Karen's group, and with residents, getting ideas for how we could address that issue. Unfortunately, I believe that the most likely solutions will be ones that 99% of the residents aren't going to like, but we still have to evaluate them.
Okay, thank you.
I'm passionate about development in our community that impacts us. That is a interwoven topic with transportation, the overall quality as more people move into the village. Being a parent, I'm passionate about education in our youth and getting our schools recognized for stellar performance. There's a perception outside of the village that our schools are not as good as the down county schools, and I would challenge that. We have IB schools here, we have great principals, great leadership, and great students. We need to showcase that more. And then the third thing I'm very passionate about is unity. Bringing our community together. We have so many different churches and nonprofits and for-profits here, but we don't seem to operate in a very integrated way. So communicating and getting people more engaged, getting more people to come out, that's something that I'm very passionate and committed to.
Thank you.
So actually, I had two suggestions. One is, and I don't know how much the foundation actually plays a role in these types of decisions, but as somebody who's looked over the constantly changing plans for the new development, the one thing that I've noticed that Montgomery Village is always missing, that the Kentlands has, that Rockville has, that Germantown has, is there is no cultural center. And by that, I mean there's no music venue. I mean, we do have the lovely, which only people who live in Montgomery Village know about, that like hidden South Lake Park there. But there's not like a central hub. Germantown has Black Rock, the Kentlands has the Arts Barn, and there's these central locations that constantly have a mix of community within them because people are always there. Rockville has the town center. And while I'm looking at this development, and I'm like, I'm glad we have mixed-use housing, and I'm glad that we're going to be rebuilding this shopping center, it still fails to address the fact that the residents don't necessarily have a reason to be there. As parents and as people who live here, I'm not going out to dinner 3-4 nights a week. It's just not a thing. But if my child has a class somewhere and we're eating out, absolutely. And that applies to all the ages of our students. And I think that greatly impacts the situation with highlighting our students, is because where do you showcase them? Outside of their schools, where do we put them on display? And anytime we do that, we're doing it in the city of Gaithersburg. And we just don't have that in the village. I did notice that there's going to be a two-part suggestion, sorry. It's a two-part suggestion, the central, go ahead.
I just want to make sure they answer your first question first, and then if you want to ask another question.
Oh, okay. So I guess the question is, do you agree, and how would you be able to affect that if you did?
Okay, thank you.
No, follow the other part.
Now I lost track again.
Sorry.
Okay, Jerome.
I wholeheartedly agree, and I want your name and your contact information, because I will recruit you to make this cultural center happen. I'm 100% behind you. We need to have a place for our residents to congregate, to learn, to socialize, so.
And just mixed-use space. I mean, we just don't have a lot of it.
Absolutely.
And what was your name?
Sorry, Victoria
Thank you. All right.
Victoria.
Robles, R-O-B-L-E-S. I love that.
I agree with Jerome. In fact, he stole my idea.
We can share the idea. He's looking for someone to head the committee.
I think that's a good idea, and I would encourage you, once the board takes it up, and the board generally has a retreat every year after the election for the directors to get together and plan out, I would suggest that you come to the next retreat, and during residence time, elaborate on your idea.
Okay.
Then the directors can discuss it, and we can bring you in perhaps to serve as chair of an ad hoc committee.
Oh, let's hope my husband doesn't watch this.
I would also like to say that we do have activities that go on through our various community centers.
This we do, and so I would also, that was actually my second question, is that I know that there's going to be some revamping of our Parks and Rec, and I would say that while I think the programs we have are fantastic, I know Jerome had mentioned integration, there's ample opportunity for these spaces to be used in a more integrated way, and I mean, I've used this particular room for everything from Girl Scout meetings to foundation board banquets and everything else, but I would say that we don't do a great job of the integrating part, and I mean, the pumpkin race is probably the only time you see all of us in the same place. Yeah, I mean, literally, there's not a person that's moved into my cul-de-sac that I haven't told to go to the pumpkin race. And ideally, I would love to have more of those events, but I would say that even looking at a cultural space, another suggestion of mine would be is to integrate that with Parks and Recs, because one of the biggest things that we lost when I purchased here was the YMCA. Yes. And part of the reason we picked Montgomery Village was because of that building, and about 6 months after we moved in, they closed it down.
So your question is?
My question would be, what kind of things do you want to see improved and integrated in the Parks and Rec program?
Okay, thank you. Yes?
Well, I would also like to add, in addition to the Great Pumpkin Race, you should come to the Breakfast with Santa. I have been to Breakfast with Santa is great. My kids are, I was 17 years old now. Okay. But I think you have a good point. I think we need to integrate more. We need to come up with more ideas for things that people can get involved in. We could have Mardi Gras parties. We could have Mardi Gras. Carnivals, things like that. There's going to be a flea market. But again, I would suggest that you come to board meetings and you put forward your ideas and really hold the board's toes to the fire.
Okay, thank you, Pam. John?
I would definitely look at the latest edition of Parks and Rec, the Apple Ridge Pool, or the Peggy Marks Pool. Right, which I learned had 25,000 visitors in its first year. Did you all know that? I'm pretty sure they were all A lot of young families, gathering place, spa and resort kind of feel to it. And so I think we know what our audience, our residents want. They want that kind of environment where they can enjoy the community, where they can walk somewhere, not necessarily have to drive. So the sky's the limit. It's just a matter of how the board can responsibly, select on which events would have the most impact.
Okay, thank you, Jerome. Okay, sure.
Duncan is actually has a survey out.
Yes.
Yes, he does. Yes.
Are you aware of the survey?
Yes.
Okay.
So actually, my next question is possibly where we lack some integration, is how do you feel about creating something that would put the people who are renting in Montgomery Village in the conversation? Because I think, and right now, a lot of us are homeowners, I'm a homeowner, but because there's nothing that represents those that are renting here, and there is a large population of renters in this community, when we integrate, we're always going to be leaving them out of that equation if there's not something for them. And I'm not necessarily suggesting because we're paying into that program, but because they are residents here, I think that those of us that are renting out our properties would find ourselves with much better tenants and people who are far more incorporated into what we're doing and integrated into that kind of share of that community feel if they had a platform of some sort to voice their comments and concerns. Because in this place, we just don't have it. So how do you feel about including the renters?
Okay. I think it's Jerome's.
Sure. I'm in agreement with that. I mean, I don't see any reason to exclude renters from gathering data and sentiment about their experience living in the village. I mean, at some point, everyone in this room rented, right? It may have been a long time ago. So I think that's a great idea.
Thank you, Pam.
Well, when I first moved into the village, these many years ago, not as long as the Mondells, but, or Sarah, I was a renter, and I rented for 7 years before I bought my house. And although I did not feel there was any real outreach from the government of the village to me, I did know that I was able to go to just about everything that the village had to offer. My landlord was very nice, and part of my deal was that I got the activity card every year, so I could use the pools, I could take my son to breakfast with Santa. I think we need to do a better job of reaching out to the renters and letting them know that they can participate in what goes on in the village and that we welcome them. And from there, it'll be a step towards getting their input.
Thank you, Pam.
For some of us seniors and maybe people that don't have a lot of money also, is there a need for the foundation to provide computer classes for seniors so they can upgrade their skills, computer skills? I know when I went from the latest Windows version, XP, up to X10, everything was there, plus a lot more was there, and it is hard to find everything, you know, that I was used to. And also hardware, too. Hardware, you can spend a lot of money on hardware, but could the foundation give some help in both those areas, hardware and software, and maybe even provide Wi-Fi in an area or something like that? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich.
Well, yes, I think that may be a good idea if we had people who wanted to volunteer to do that. Now, the foundation could try to organize it. Mike? No, okay. But in terms of Wi-Fi and having access to hardware, we have the library right there on the edge of the village, and
Yes.
that is available to
Yes.
all the village residents. Beyond that, that's something that we could certainly look at. But in terms of classes for seniors, I think that would be a good idea. I know that once I retire, although maybe not for a long time, once I get away from my office, I'm not going to stay on top of anything.
All right, thank you, Pam. Troy?
Yeah, I agree with Pam in using the resources that are available. The library is a great resource. They have the systems there. As long as you have a library card, you can leverage that. We do have capacity in terms of these community centers, and I'm sure there are people who are enthusiasts about sharing information. They would gladly volunteer that. We can tap into the Volunteer Center. It's a database in the county that links volunteers with organizations. And so it's just a matter of being creative with what already exists and then making that available to the community who wants it.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Well, I want to thank our candidates for their time this evening and also all of you for coming. It's very important to have this interaction and for you to get to know the candidates, and also the film and the transcript will be available for the people that weren't here. And the transcript will be in the next Village News, I believe, and then the video will be on YouTube. The ballots will be mailed out this Friday, so everyone can vote, and then they're due back March 2nd. So, and then we'll count them and post the results. So thank you again, and thank you to our candidates.
Thank you.